Video game soundtracks have been exceptional lately. Well, they actually always have been. You got classics like Nine Inch Nails doing its work on the original Quake soundtrack, which to this day is still some people's favorite music that Trent Reznor ever made. The Dark Souls games have epic orchestras that make you feel like you're stacked against immeasurable odds, while also being a being that can rival gods, filling you with a deep melancholy while the game shows you greater icons of faith, godlyhood, and heroism weathered down after ages pass from their golden age. Halo soundtracks composed by Martin O'Donnell, they're one of my favorites too. Then in Halo 2, you get some contemporary artists like Breaking Benjamin to absolutely blast their music into our heads at the best times possible. Seriously, just enter the Mausoleum of the Arbiter on the original Xbox, it's awesome. Hotline Miami 1 and 2 had blasting soundtracks that embody the game and its themes, while also highlighting multiple different independent artists, adding a new personality to each and every level. And I'd be remiss not to talk about good old Mick Gordon either. I would argue that Killer Instinct has a soundtrack that is better or rivals that of Guilty Gears, with an adaptive soundtrack for each and every character. And if you aren't sold on this guy yet, he made the soundtrack for Doom 2016 and Atomic Heart 2. Seriously, this guy is a freaking weapon. I think everybody has a passing knowledge of the new God of War duology at this point, and knows about the constant motif used within its soundtrack. But I talk about Warhammer and Warhammer adjacent things, which brings us to this cute little game called Warhammer 40k Darktide, and how frickin' rad its soundtrack is. Usually when I talk about Dark Tizzy, it's about the game's overall state of play, and sometimes talking about updates or classes. But today we're going to be talking about the absolute monumental achievement that is Darktide's soundtrack, which people usually aren't worried about, but man, when you play a game with a good soundtrack, it really elevates the rest of it, in combination with graphics and gameplay, especially when the game doesn't have one or two combat tracks like Skyrim.
Never should have come here.
The soundtrack of Darktide is composed and directed by Jesper Kyd, who has made soundtracks for games like the mainline Borderlands, some Assassin's Creeds, so needless to say, he's been around the block for game companies and directing video game music. Even working for Fat Shark, the developers of Darktide, for the Vermintide games, so he is even well-versed in Warhammer. Even if it is fantasy, the old world, and specifically the end times. So I think it was kind of a no-brainer to bring him back for an outing in the grim darkness of Warhammer 40k. Above all else, I believe that Darktide excels at making an amazing showcase for what a soundtrack for a Warhammer 40k game should sound like. And for the most part, I would say that only one other Warhammer 40k game has a truly great soundtrack that is criminally underexposed. In the Mechanicus game, that's much more worried about it making a soundtrack that's a bit more slow and methodical, and synthetic to meld with the game more, because of the robotic Mechanicus and their enemies in this game, the Necrons, who are just a bunch of robots, especially compared to the high-tempo, chaotic parts of Darktide's soundtrack. But please don't let that dissuade you from listening to the soundtrack of the Mechanicus. It's expertly made and amazing in its own right. But the soundtrack that Kyd crafted feels like Belisarius' Call, improving upon the Emperor's very own Space Marines. The first thing that makes Darktide's soundtrack so great is that it's aware of the failings of other 40k soundtracks, with most of them missing out a little bit on the very things that make 40k iconic. Here's one for example. Even though most of the art that comes out of Warhammer 40k looks like a Meltdown album cover, the games that use it as a backing track usually don't work the best. In fact, you want to know when Metal Alone works? When the game is focusing on a faction that is shown to rock out, with them being the main focus. Like in Shoot His Blood and Teeth, and for the most part, I don't feel like that soundtrack really leaves any big impact on you, even if you are a fan of some of those guitar riffs. I would argue that the most memorable song on the entire game is the one named after the game. It's emblematic of the game's themes, where you're a silly orc having fun carving your way through a world because someone snatched your weave. Plus, it's goth rock. Who doesn't love goth rock?
Out in the world with nothing to do, not even a minute to tear up the ground.
Man, don't you just love orcs? The universe of Warhammer 40k has lots of religious iconography and magics in it that are more resembling of a fantasy setting, which might make you think of Lord of the Rings and epic orchestral music, while maybe using some choirs and monk-like chants with the orchestras creating the sound of dark fantasy, which is good and I think it works, but it's also a little too safe for 40k, being a little bit boring and kind of melding in with everything else. If you look at soundtracks like Space Marine, you really start to see it. I don't think there's anything really special special in that game's composition. Chaos Gate Demon Hunters also has this issue, but they put some synths in and use some pipe organ that makes it sound really good, but I don't even know how, but it's somehow in one ear and out the other for these soundtracks. Not saying they're not good, they're just pretty forgettable. So Jesper Kyd decided to go for something different when he made Darktide's soundtrack, completely forgoing the genre of metal altogether. Instead, he used the grime of the universe and made something completely new. Ooh, let's start off with a little classical music with pipe organs and choral singing as a bass line, borrowing some flavor from Vermintide. And then because it's dark sci-fi fantasy, not just dark fantasy, I don't know, let's throw in some techno in there and use heavy industrial sounds. And from those few main ideas, we get an extraordinary achievement that now basically define what a Warhammer 40k soundtrack should be. Let me level with you here for a second, boils and ghouls. Unfortunately, we aren't going to be experiencing the entire soundtrack of Darktide together today. I respect your time too much to do that to you. So instead, we're going to be speaking by example. So we're going to be going through parts of the soundtrack and going over how exceptionally mind-blowingly awesome it is. So we're going over what's probably the proof of concept for this entire soundtrack that might showcase how Kyd built it up with layers of music. How each part of the soundtrack layers on top of itself to create a grimdark cake for our ears' perusal. So let's go through a SparkNotes version of the track and go through what makes the music so magical. Darktide's main theme starts off distant, discordant, screeching, and almost foreboding and horrific. Darktide's main theme starts off distant, discordant, screeching, and almost foreboding and horrific. Then a slow pulse of something unknown comes in as drums and strings start to pluck and pound, adding a sense of tension. This is what a fantasy track would sound like. This is humanity fighting against chaos during the end times, fighting desperately, being on the brink of ruin, and then, seemingly out of nowhere, a loud, consistently heavy synth beat plays in unison as the choirs chant, and the discordant tones combine into a song full of malice and aggression. Adding a consistent fast beat through the rest of the song until its completion, where it resolves slowly, having a female choir finish with a chilling conclusion. Woo! I don't know about you guys, but I think this track is fire for the way it introduces layers of music and compounds upon them to introduce people into the 41st millennium. Seriously. Jeez, I love Warhammer 40k, it's so cool. The combined layers start in the realms of fantasy with horns, drums, and choral singing, and then compound into a techno beat that makes the brain release dopamine at an alarming rate. Then let's look at Space Marine soundtrack. Yeah, it's good, it's well composed, but it lacks that, panache. That being said, Darktide's theme itself isn't heard during the regular gameplay, and is instead used in game ending screens and the startup music for the game. So now let's look over one that you might stumble upon during your adventures in Hive Tertium. Disposal Unit, open parenthesis, Imperium Mix, close parenthesis, is the track that I've heard the most in and outside of the game, and that's for a good reason, because it's so hype and fills you with the power of the Golden Throne. The start of this song is quite different from the main theme, with it starting off with a main beat that is added upon. It's mainly industrial techno. A female vocalist comes in, adding that bit of fantasy before chanting is put in with deep voices. It starts in tandem with the beats of the music, and one of the hardest beat drops I've heard during the limited time I've had on this earth. The soundtrack is full of tracks that play off of the more industrial theme, mostly seen in combat section of the game. And I think this one in particular is a perfect blend of choral and industrial that is high energy and frantic. One of my favorite things about the track is that when the song dies down, you hear a strained violin play as its bow saws back and forth on its string, emblematic of the ceaseless, unending war that wears down every civilization into mere distorted reflections of what they used to truly be. The Imperium mix is also a remix of the normal disposal unit, which acts more like a primer for the Imperium mix, mainly consisting of more industrial sounds than adding some synth to round it out. But the Imperium mix of disposal units fully encapsulates the aggression, darkness, and hopelessness of the 41st millennium. There's a reason it's practically the go-to theme for 40k now. Good job, Mr. Jesper Kyd. You get a gold star. The last track I want to talk about is something that's a bit more experimental, and different in a way that's pretty interesting because the music itself isn't just the ones we hear in our ears, but also the ones we hear emanating from the speakers within the game, or diegetic music for short. A more recent example of this would be Groovy Longlegs from Pikmin 4. And the one track I want to talk about comes from the Carnival in Warp Traveler. Warp Traveler is a lot more electro and even EDM than most of the other tracks in the game. Seriously, let's just take a quick listen. This music exists within the lore of the game, and my best guess is it's the music in the universe of the Carnival, based off the Carnival-like motifs that it uses. No choral music is used in this track, which makes it somehow less and more experimental, being a bit more upbeat, yet weirdly dissonant, and not using any chants, with most of the chords ending in a resolution that's lower than where it started, which I would bet makes it the most controversial track in the entirety of the game, because if you don't like EDM, this might not be your favorite, but I like it on the basis that it's probably some music that people in 40k would actually listen to, like how people listen to silly clowncore playlists now. So that's just some of Darktide's amazing soundtrack. Did you like the video, and would you like to see me cover more Darktide soundtrack and cool other new things? Make sure to tell me in the comments down below, and if this video interests you in any way, I would tell you to go out and do some field research on your own and listen to the sound. It's on YouTube, it's free, and it's not something you have to sit down and think critically, or it's something that you have to experience in a certain order. It's not a Tool album. You can get up and do your own thing at any time. Anyway, I hope you guys really liked this video, because I really did. And this one's more experimental than most. And thank you if you got to this point in the video. It helps me out on my channel a lot. Till next video, fellas.